and it's being recorded, and as soon as everybody's in, then I'll commence the meeting. Thank you. And let me know when they're all in, please, Holly.
All in. That they're all. Yeah, they're all in.
Everybody's in. Thank you. Good. I was going to say good afternoon, but it's good morning still to everybody. This is the local North Sydney Local Planning Panel, and we have convened this morning to consider a planning proposal that has been put forward by the council. And I will just say at this point in time, the planning panel, with respect to rezonings, has only a limited role in that we make a recommendation to the council, and then it's up to the council as to what decision they make. So this is the very beginning of the process. If, for example, council choose to proceed with the planning proposal, then it will go through the full exhibition, etc. But at this point in time, our only role is to make a recommendation as opposed to a determination, which is what we do for all development applications that come to the panel. So this morning we have on the panel myself, Jan Morell. I've been the chair for a number of years, and prior to being a chair of the panel, I was a commissioner with the Land and Environment Court for 14 years before retiring. And I have no conflict of interest in this matter. I'll ask Mr. Gerard Teruzzi to introduce himself.
Yes, I'm Gerard Teruzzi. I'm a town planner. I've got 35 years experience, approximately 15 in local government, the rest in private sector, acting for developers as well as councils. And I've got no conflict of interest.
Thank you. And Mr. Grant Christmas?
Good morning. I am a solicitor and I practice in planning and environment law. I have my own practice at Brookvale. I don't have any conflicts of interest in this matter. Thank you.
Thank you. Very well. And I'll just mention that we did have a community rep on the panel, but she agreed, and she had a potential perceived conflict of interest only, no actual conflict, but it was considered to be better for her to not participate in this meeting today. So she is not, we're minus a panel member, but we have a quorum of 3 and that's all we require. Okay then, so if I can just acknowledge the traditional custodians of this land, past, present, and those emerging, and I joined council in doing that. The panel will be hearing from any submitters, that is anyone objectors, and any applicants, representatives are also given the opportunity to address the panel this morning. We have some 12 people who will be addressing the panel. So could I ask you all to very much focus on what your issue is or your concern, so that we don't have all of the issues repeated, but by all means you can advise that you concur with the previous speaker or whatever else, but just focus on what your main point or main issue that you wish the panel to hear you on. Now, I can also say that we've received considerable late correspondence, and the panel members have all made themselves clear on having read the submissions that have come through late. So I just wish to also point that out to everybody, that you don't need to read your submissions because we have had the benefit of reading same. So in this regard, I will invite the first, and also I just need to also make the point, and I don't normally do this, but on this occasion it's very important that I would like each individual speaker to just focus on the issues and not on the personalities or the people. And I don't want anyone to make any adverse remarks about people because this is a recorded meeting, public meeting, and it is the only official recording. So I just make that point. As I said, I don't normally need to state that. So the first person that I have on the agenda to speak is Fiona Gracie. Fiona Gracie, are you there? Yes, you are. Put yourself on mute. Have you unmuted her, Holly? Yes, thank you, Holly. Thank you, Fiona. Yep.
And good morning. As you've just stated, my name is Fiona Gracie and I am a co-founder of the Cremorne Conservation Group. Our group strongly supports a recommendation by North Sydney to North Sydney Council by the panel to progress this planning proposal for the properties in Holt Avenue to the DPE for a gateway determination. We have read the report that was submitted by GML Heritage, and we agree wholeheartedly with the recommendations of that report. In particular, we note that they have stated that Edward Garton, who was a renowned architect of his time and the designer of Leesthorpe, a state heritage item in Mossman, was responsible or likely responsible for multiple properties in this group, as well as the fact that there are two properties at the end of the group, 131 and 133, as being rare surviving examples of their type from the Victorian period. I don't want to go over any of the details in the report. I know that everybody here today has probably read it in depth, but I would like to call the panel's attention to the fact that the report does state that all properties in this proposal, all 8 of them, meet the threshold for cultural significance on multiple levels, including historic, aesthetic, rarity values, and representative values. I'd also like to draw the panel's attention to a letter that I have received from New South Wales Heritage last October, which I have forwarded to North Sydney Council earlier this year. And that letter states, and I will quote, that they recommend and encourage North Sydney Council to investigate the possible inclusion of all 8 properties on its local environmental plan. And finally, I would also like to bring the panel's attention to a petition that I undertook with local residents. Again, a copy of this petition has over 200 signatures on it, and the community as such is in strong support of these properties being listed on the North Sydney LEP. So as such, we believe that dwellings provide significant historic character and style to the heritage of our area. And we also believe that in retaining these properties, that we will have them for the current and future benefit of generations to come to appreciate our history in the area. So thank you very much for listening to me.
Thank you very much, Fiona. And you have sent a copy of the New South Wales Heritage letter to the council, or with your submission, is there?
I have done both of those.
Right. Thank you.
I think around March of this year.
Right. Thank you very much. You can get a copy of that for us. Yep. Okay. Now I'll move on to the next person, and that is Dr. Anne Little.
Hi, thank you very much. I'd first like to concur with everything that Ms. Gracie said. I'm a member of the local community. I live on the street. And I would like to speak in strong support of this group of dwellings on Holt Ave to be preserved. I've watched over the last 25 years beautiful historical houses being demolished one by one all along the southwest side of Holt Ave, where now there are only modern multi-story buildings. There are so few original houses left, which makes them all the more important to preserve. These houses are an extension of the Mossman Conservation Area and some of the very few remaining historical dwellings of this area in North Sydney Council. And these particular houses are each more than 100 years old and are a really important part of our local area's history. They provide really important information and, cultural information, and people love walking past these houses in the community. They're beautiful and the gardens are beautiful, and there's something that would be a real tragedy to destroy. My main point that I want to add to what Ms. Gracie said was that I want to emphasize that having a balance is important, and you know, having at least some heritage houses remaining is really, I think, an important part of North Sydney Council's local planning plan. The LEP. And it's so important to have a balance where, you know, we don't just have multi-story dwellings taking up the entire street. It's so important to have a balance of the old with the new. And once we destroy these houses, we can never get them back. So I and other members of the local community in the street, and I'm speaking in representation of many others who are also in agreement, welcome and support the recommendation for this final assessment by GML Heritage to confirm the Holt Ave dwellings are significant across multiple dimensions and are very worthy of preservation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Little. And could I invite Mr. John Altram to address the panel? I can see you there.
Yes, I'm here.
Yes, thank you.
I thought Mr. Chris Cunningham was speaking before me.
Sorry. Yes, you are right. I have missed Mr. Chris Cunningham-Reid. So can I invite Mr. Chris Cunningham-Reid?
Thank you.
On behalf of Helm to address the panel.
Yeah, thank you. My name's Chris Cunningham-Reid and I'm speaking today in objection to the proposed heritage planning proposal on behalf of Helm, who are the owners of 131 and 133 Holt Avenue, Cremorne. These properties are part of a larger development site incorporating 131 to 139 Holt Avenue. This site has been subject of a development application proposing a residential flat building comprising 22 apartments and basement parking. North Sydney Council has assessed this DA and written a report recommending the project's approval. We are strongly opposed to this planning proposal and request the panel defer their consideration and determination for the following reasons. As stated in our Monday submission, there have been 6 independent heritage assessments of 131 and 133 Holt Avenue by leading New South Wales heritage architects, completed in 2021 prior to the development application being submitted. These reports were provided to the panel on Monday, and all 6 heritage experts are registered to speak today and are available to answer any questions the panel may have. These reports were completed independently of each other and were undertaken 9 months prior to North Sydney Council passing a motion to investigate placing an IHO over these properties. Each assessment has concluded that both 131 and 133 Holt Avenue do not meet the criteria for listing as individual heritage items or as a group or as part of any conservation area. The Council Planning Proposal Report before you today makes no mention of these 6 reports, despite the Council resolution requiring these 6 reports be considered. We do not believe that this planning proposal and GML's report can be considered without having also considered these 6 reports. 131 and 133 Holt Avenue are also subject to an interim heritage order, which we have appealed in the Land and Environment Court and are seeking for it to be revoked. The hearing has occurred and a decision is expected within the next week or so. The appeal has considered the heritage merit of 131 and 133 Holt, and a substantial amount of information was presented at this hearing, which is critical to this matter, including information regarding the conduct of Council's consultant, GML, whose lead...
Can I just say, I don't want to go into any of that. I just want to hear what the facts are on the matter from your point of view.
Yeah, the only fact there is the consultant worked for Council for 9.5 years. We're unable to disclose any further information until after the court's findings are handed down. As such, we believe it would be premature for the panel to make any decision regarding the properties prior to the court's findings being handed down and this information being presented to the panel. Finally, as panel members are aware, local planning panels were enacted, amongst other reasons, to ensure the politicisation of the planning system did not occur. It is clear that the current councillors are weaponising IHOs to further their own political agenda. This land has been zoned for apartments for over 40 years, and a total of 9 heritage studies have found the properties have no heritage value. The planning proposal before the panel today is a direct result of the politicisation of the current heritage legislation. It represents poor planning and an abuse of the New South Wales planning system. Without consideration of the 6 heritage reports and prior to the Land and Environment Court findings being handed down, we do not believe the panel is able to make a fully considered decision, and we respectfully request the panel defer their decision until this has happened. If the panel do not decide to defer, we request the panel do not endorse this planning proposal and ensure it doesn't proceed to Gateway. Thank the panel for their time. I'll now hand over to John Altram to provide more detail on the lack of heritage significance of these properties. You'll also briefly hear from the 5 other heritage architects who do not believe these properties have any heritage significance later on. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Cunningham-Reid. Mr. John Altram, sorry I missed you there in the first instance. Yes?
That's okay, Chair. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. We were commissioned by Helm to provide a heritage assessment without any reference to the other assessments that have been carried out. And we carried it out and then revised it in relation to the GML report, which we completed earlier this year. Between 1984 and 2007, Council arranged for heritage studies of the North Sydney LGA. In 1981, a report was prepared by Latona Masterman. In 1993, a report was prepared by Gordon Mackay-Logan. This was amended in 1995. In 1999, a report was prepared by the Australian Street Company, including Paul Davis, a well-known heritage architect. And in 2007, we, in association with Architectus, carried out a review of conservation areas heritage items in the LGA. None of those reports identified these properties as being suitable for listing, nor did they recommend an establishment of a conservation area along the Longview estate. In the 2007 report, we recommended that 125 Holt Avenue be removed from the listings, and this was accepted by Council, including Council's Heritage Advisor Lisa Truman, who prepared the GML report. Council is now considering listing 8 properties in the street as heritage items. As Chris noted, 6 heritage studies have been carried out on these properties aside from the GML report, and none of them have found the properties at 131 to 133 Holt Avenue to be of heritage significance, and this is also applied to the properties further along the street. We only carried out assessments of 115 to 117 Holt Avenue, but we concluded that they wouldn't meet the threshold for heritage listing, largely due to the extent of change that occurred to the houses. And the history of the sites is not in question. They were part of the Thrupp estate, which was established in 1816, later taken over by Daniel Cooper, who then bequeathed the sites after his death to his sons, to his nephews, including John Cooper, who took over the Thrupp estate. And from about the mid-1850s, the estate was subdivided under leasehold into various parcels, and then development occurred generally under subleases with additional subdivisions of those areas. The subject site was part of the Longview estate that was subdivided in 1885, but the first development didn't occur there till the 1890s. And the subject house, which was originally a single house on 2 lots, was built in 1892 by builder James Smith. It wasn't the first of the houses in the street. The 2 houses to the north at 135 and 137 Holt Avenue were built at the same time, but they've been very heavily altered and were not even considered in the GML assessment. There were also properties in Military Road, which have now been demolished for commercial development. The lease of the house was sold to Myra Reynolds in 1911, and she subsequently submitted 2 development applications, one for an addition to 133 and one for an addition to 131, which effectively divided the houses in 2 and added frontages on each side. The original house was in a late Victorian style, Italianate sort of filigree style, and the later additions adopted some of this form in terms of the gable to 133, but added an overlay of Edwardian detail, which can also be seen in the interior. And while the exterior form was altered, 50% of it was added, but the interior detail was quite crude, with walls being placed onto the original timber floors in order to form corridors to link to the new additions, and some of the original fabric removed. Since then, there have been later alterations to the rear of both properties, and currently nearly 60% over the original built form is what consists of the properties at the moment. I have a diagram here, which if you wish to see it, I'm happy to provide it, which shows that scale of development. Is that okay, Chair?
Yes, thank you very much.
So,
yes.
This is a diagram that was prepared for the court, and the yellow items are the original house and the blue and red are the additions. And you can see on the frontage, the hip roof form of the original house was altered to add parts to each side. So the house...
just one moment, have we got that particular diagram?
We have it on file, yeah.
We have it on file, thank you, yes.
Thank you.
Yep.
So the alterations completely distorted the original form of the single house that was on the lot. And now we have a combination of forms and detail, which has obscured the legibility, and the interior detail has been heavily altered. 113 Holt Avenue has also been heavily modernised internally, with walls removed and some of the original fabric also replaced. We carried out an assessment of the buildings using the Heritage Manual criteria, and we concluded that they would not meet the standard for assessment as being heritage items. We provided comparative analysis of the subdivision patterns across the Thrupp estate and found that that was a relatively common occurrence. We provided comparative examples of both Victorian and Edwardian houses, which were also found to be quite typical. And we also provided a comparative example from 1930 onwards, because records weren't available prior to that, of buildings that had been altered in order to provide flats or additional dwellings or subdivide them into duplexes. And I was quite surprised actually by the number of those that had occurred. So that means in terms of rarity, the buildings do not meet the threshold for being rare in the area. Both the house styles and the types are quite common and are heavily represented by heritage listings and also in the number of conservation areas in the LGA. The Heritage Manual criteria focus on the special qualities of buildings in order for them to be heritage listed. And if you read through the various criteria, you'll see the words important, strong or special associations, a high degree of creative or technical achievement, uncommon or rare. And we've clearly demonstrated in our report that the buildings do not meet that level of criteria in order to be identified as heritage items. The form of the house is not clear. The original form of the house is not clear on initial inspection, and it's only the historical records that would point to the level of change that has occurred. Though intactness is not a measure of significance, it certainly plays a role in an assessment of significance and an identification of original fabric. And so we've identified that the subdivision pattern was common across the Thrupp estate. The style of both the original house and the Edwardian detail is also common. The houses have no garden features of note, they're all modern. And the comparative analysis also covers alterations to houses. We did an assessment of the GML report and its assessment of significance for these properties. It was identified under 3 criteria as being significant, but we demonstrated in response to each of those that the buildings do not meet the level that is required in order to provide them with heritage item listing status. It's interesting in the GML assessment that they consider that the houses do not meet criterion G, representativeness, which is very unusual. If you identify something under one of the other criteria, it almost certainly would fall under some representative example of a building or type of building in a conservation area or in the LGA. And it's interesting to note that under that criteria, the report notes the buildings are not considered fine examples of Victorian Italianate or Federation dwelling typologies. We concluded that though the houses were one of the earliest in the street, that was simply a matter of timing. They were built 7 years after the subdivision occurred, and inevitably development occurred following. Little development occurred in the following years because there was a major economic downturn in 1893 that saw development slow, and it wasn't until the 1900s that development started to occur more generally across the Longview estate. And the fact that they're the earliest, some of the earliest houses in the street is irrelevant, and that's reflected in the non-assessment of 135 and 137 Holt Avenue, which were not considered because their level of change is so obvious. I don't think the GML assessment paid due regard to the level of changes that had occurred. And if one was proposing such changes now, I don't think they would be accepted. And the chair would be aware of a recent meeting where 104 Wickham Road, which is a heritage item in Carrabba Point, was rejected on the basis of the level of change that was proposed, even though I consider the level of change there was not as great as what can be seen on the Holt Avenue properties. In regard to the other properties further down the street, we only did heritage assessments of 115 and 119. We carried out the same level assessment in terms of comparative analyses and assessment of the GML report. And we also concluded that those three properties did not meet the level of significance for heritage listing. We analysed the changes that occurred to all of the buildings and clearly demonstrated that they had been considerably altered from the original form. They were built, some of them were built by the same builder, largely because they were all under common ownership of a building company at that time. Well, obviously, it seems common sense that they used the same builders to build them, but they do not read as a group now. Two of them were very close in terms of detail, but the third at 119 was not. And the two of the houses further to the south have now been demolished. I would concur with Chris that it's important that council maintain a standard or a level where they're assessing heritage properties, and they should use the heritage listing criteria judiciously and seek to look to properties that do have some special qualities rather than those which are mundane or which have been very heavily altered. And I think that it is an abuse of the system here to use heritage to actually stop development when it's clearly allowed under the planning controls that are generally applied to this area. And I believe other consultants will speak in more detail to the properties at 115 to 125 Holt Avenue. Thank you, Chair.
Yes, we have a question for you, Mr. Altram. Yes.
This is Jared Teresi. If I understood correctly, you made a comment earlier that 125 was previously listed and then was delisted.
Yes.
Do you know why it was delisted? Can you explain why that property was delisted?
I carried out the assessment myself. I was working with somebody initially, but I decided that it was better to actually assess all of the properties, which was over 400 in the conservation areas and outside. We looked at all the heritage items. We looked at the plans of the houses. I didn't actually inspect them internally, but it was clear that that house had been heavily altered. It's been converted to apartments, and that's apparent in the external form of the house and the additions that have occurred to the rear. And we recommended to North City Council that it be delisted. It was one of very few that were delisted at that time. I think this total was less than 9 probably of that report, of that assessment. And that was accepted by Council's heritage officers at the time.
Thank you.
Thank you. Just on that, I presume then, Mr. Altram, you did an internal inspection of it?
Of 125?
Yep.
No, we didn't, because of the scale of the study. There was another property in Cremorne Avenue, which was the subject of a potential delisting. Council accepted that, but that was later challenged and it's actually been relisted as a property. And because the owner at that time raised objections to its continuation for listing, we did actually carry out an internal inspection of that property at the time in association with Lisa Truman, as it happens. And we concluded that the level of alteration that occurred externally and internally meant that that house should be delisted, but it has now been relisted in a similar process to what is happening on the properties in Holt Avenue, where an IHO was proposed and the IHO was then turned into a heritage listing. I would note though that that house in Cremorne Avenue was actually designed by a very well-known architect who'd worked extensively in North Sydney and Mossman, and that was the primary reason that I think that the listing was reimposed.
Thank you very much, Mr. Altram. Mr. Christmas, if you've got any questions, always raise your hand. Mr. Michael Wang, can I invite you to address the panel?
Yes.
And bear in mind, if everyone can bear in mind that the panel has read all the submissions that have been forwarded. Thank you. Yes.
Thanks, panel. And thanks for the opportunity allowing me to address the panel for the planning proposal 722. I'm representing the owner and the ratepayers of 115, 117 and 119 Hot Avenue. I trust the panel is independent, non-political, and will look at assessing the planning proposal on its merits. So at the time we decide to proceed with our development of 115 to 119 Hot Avenue, we obtained advice from two highly respected heritage consultants, Urbis and Ware Phillips, that our properties has no heritage value. Council had also completed numerous heritage studies, and our properties has never been heritage listed, nor within a conservation area. The zoning of our land was R3, which allowing for residential flat building. As the panel may aware, a council meeting was held back in March 2021, also dismissed the motion to place an interim heritage order of our properties. The results of the council meeting gave us the confidence to prepare our DA as per the planning guidelines in place, which did not have any heritage constraints of our properties. So during the DA assessment process carried out by council, no heritage issues were raised until the DA assessment process was nearly complete. When following the election of a new council, council rushed through a motion to place an interim heritage order of our properties and also other properties in Hot Avenue. So we assume this was done for political purposes in order to stop our development.
Can I just say, I'm only interested in the merits and the facts in this matter. So
Sure.
you don't need to speak about what council's motives may have been. Thank you.
Sure. So as the panel may aware, council engaged heritage consultant GML to prepare the interim report, which recommended interim heritage order placed on our properties. Subsequently, GM have prepared a final report, which recommended our properties to be heritage listed through this planning proposal. Please note these reports were prepared by Ms. Lisa Truman, who had been an employee.
Once again, I don't need any associated relationships or whatever else. I just want to hear the facts. Thank you.
Sure. So currently there's a court process in motion and our case hearing is scheduled for next week. As such, we don't understand how this planning proposal can proceed while the court case is still to be determined. The planning proposal should not be supported, or at the least should be deferred until after the court has made its decision. Council should respect the court process and its outcome before rushing through proposed LEP amendments. If council does rush through these changes ahead of the court hearing and court decision, we will certainly raise the matter with the Department of Planning. I also want the panel to take time to carefully read and consider the 3 additional reports we submitted as part of our submission, which were prepared by 3 highly respected heritage consultants.
Can I just, sorry, Mr. Wang, I just need to ask everybody that's not speaking to go on mute. Thank you, Mr. Altram. Yes, continue on, Mr. Wang.
Sure. So the 3 additional reports were prepared by 3 highly respected heritage consultants, Urbis, John Altram, and Ware Phillips. Read the heritage value of our properties. All consultants have advised as our properties have no heritage value worth listing either individually or as a group. So I will let Ms. Stephen to address this part in his later speech. I don't believe council are aware of these reports, or if they are, they have not included them in preparing this planning proposal. So to sum up, I strongly object to this planning proposal. It appears that it has been prepared in a hurry for political reasons, using advice from a consultant that could have a conflict of interest, and without considering reports that have been prepared by 3 Sydney's leading heritage consultants. Our DA was prepared in good faith, using council's planning guidelines at the time with no mention of heritage constraints of our property, until, for what I assume is a political reasons, that the new council decided to have this property heritage listed during the DA process to prevent the DA from being decisioned. Council has to have a set of planning guidelines that can be relied on during the DA process and not changed for the political reason partway through the DA process. Council cannot abuse of their power using interim heritage order and the planning proposal as a weapon to prevent development, particularly where DAs are being assessed and have been prepared complying with the council's planning guidelines at the time. If there is any lack of denial of procedural fairness and our important reports are not being considered, then this is a matter our lawyer will immediately raise with the Department.
Yep. Okay, I don't need to hear what your alternative courses of action are because I'm fully aware of those in any event. I just need you to focus on why we shouldn't be considering this matter in terms of the PP. Okay.
Sure. So with all the above, so I sincerely hope the local planning panel will not support this planning proposal, or at least be deferred until after the Land and Environment Court has made its decision. Once again, we strongly object to this planning proposal. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Wang. Now I would like to invite Mr. Stephen Davies from Urbis to address the panel.
Thank you, Chair and panel. Stephen Davies from Urbis. There have been a number of, John Altram has very eloquently addressed a number of the points I was going to make, but I will move through some of those points quickly and outline my concerns and my objection for the individual and group listing of the subject dwellings in Holt Avenue. We were commissioned, as you heard prior, to the consideration by council as part of the development application. We presented a preliminary assessment, and that assessment has now been finalised with further information and forms part of a package with a number of other consultants that you have heard of, including Weir Phillips and John Altram. All reports concluded that the buildings do not reach the threshold for listing, except for the GML report, which includes the very altered semi that John Altram talked about in detail, and the former single house, which has been converted to a residential flat building. All cottages are not worthy to be were considered in all of the reports by the council, by GML and the consultants, and it was agreed that each of these cottages in Holt Avenue did not reach individual threshold for significance, notwithstanding that GML determined that there was a group issue in relation to those cottages. So we object to the group listings for the following reasons. So I'll go to the group. And the dwellings were once part of the larger cohesive estate. The documents that you will see have shown what was quite a significant area of single dwellings in an original subdivision. These have predominantly gone. Unlike the Holt estate, which is very nearby in the Mosman municipality, just one street away, where you have an entire subdivision with very little intrusion and very cohesive streetscapes, this Holt Avenue has been significantly altered. Now, this is those demolished were done through the orderly construction of planned higher density development in the area. And you've heard about the planning history, and you've heard about the heritage studies that have accompanied those planning studies. This is a long-term strategic planning decision. The planning for the area has now provided the locality of higher density dwellings surrounded, which surround these cottages. So they've all have amenity issues in relation to what council has reasonably done to provide increased density for the North Sydney area. The reasons, and as one of the speakers said, that there are so few left in the street, it's not that they have to be conserved because they're rare, it's because this area was designated for higher density, and this has been part of an orderly process. There is this large conservation area designated nearby, and I have to say, as a heritage planner who was involved in the first heritage listing of a heritage area in Paddington, it's quite a frustrating process that this sort of process follows the planning process rather than determines the planning process. The disintegration of the area by higher density development and the opportunity to provide higher density in this location in a strategic manner has so reduced the integrity of the area as a group listing, and it's not justified. It is admitted that the cottages are representative examples of their type. They're early 19th century cottages. We note their alteration, both internally and externally, but it must be understood that there are a large number of Federation cottages in the region and the area that are not listed. If we were going to list every single Federation cottage in Sydney, then we really need a SEP or some sort of planning document for all buildings prior to 1918, but we don't have that. We have a process where individual buildings are subject to individual consideration as to whether they reach the threshold as a group. John Oldham has gone into that in quite a bit of detail, and therefore they should be subject to the assessment under the criteria that apply to all heritage buildings. It is concluded that they don't meet that threshold. The dwellings are not historically individually significant. There's no historical significance relating to the dwellings just as a remnant group, that there's a group of buildings that are sitting there. There's nothing specific about that particular relationship. The dwellings form part of a once larger subdivision, and this subdivision was typical of the period and has no specific qualities that historically make it significant, such as a design subdivision like Haverfield or some of the well-known Burley Griffin estates. So it is typical, it is not unusual. Aesthetically, the dwellings are representative of the type. However, there is nothing aesthetically significant about the group of three that would provide for their group listing. That's 115 to 119, which we've been very involved in a detailed manner. The threshold would require that they are significant because of their design, integrity, or association with an important designer. These are all part of the standard criteria assessment. They are not associated with technical achievement, aesthetically distinctive, nor do they have landmark qualities. The groups certainly are not rare, as the small federation bungalow type is numerous and not under threat. Comparative analysis shows that the recorded groups, if you have a group, they're generally, when we look around the North Sydney area and the Mosman area, and we've done a survey of these, that they generally are specifically included in conservation areas. You often have a conservation area that has an individual group that forms outstanding within that area, or if they're outside conservation areas, they have more unusual or rare typologies that form in small numbers that we don't see generally. These don't actually come into that category. So the group represents representative dwellings as a remnant of what were typical dwellings of a once larger subdivision. These qualities are well represented in other conservation areas in North Sydney and nearby Mosman. So the detailed assessment by the three external consultants on this site make these points very clearly. And you'll also be hearing from GBA, Graham Brooks from GBA, and Pam Jeffrey from City Plan in relation to this matter. I do not believe this panel has the advantage of reviewing the other heritage reports, and this is a process, as we've heard before, that's currently with the Land and Environment Court. So I reiterate our objection on the basis of our thorough assessment. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Davies. Any questions?
No.
No, thank you very much, Mr. Christmas Wright. I'll now move to Ms. Paula Mottick. Thank you, Paula.
Thank you, Chair and panel. Thanks for the opportunity to address you today. Chris and I, my husband Chris and I have owned and lived in our house at 123 Holt Avenue since 2006. I have to say straight up, we would never have purchased this house had it been covered by heritage listing. We are fully aware of the imposition that that puts on a property, and we would never purchase the property. We're strongly opposed to the council's proposal to list our house as a heritage item under the North Sydney LEP. We feel that we are being pushed into a position whereby our property would be devalued and our ability to make any changes to our home would be severely restricted, and we do not believe that there is sufficient strategic or site-specific merit for this proposal to be progressed. And I have to say that having sat here just now and heard the discussion and the information put forward by the heritage experts, that just cements my view even further. It's quite clear to us that this is not an attempt to preserve houses that demonstrate immense heritage value. And again, from what I've just listened to, that view is very clear. And in fact, if it was about preserving the immense heritage value that these dwellings have always demonstrated, they would have been listed many years ago. And Mr. Oldham's just outlined the detail in which these previous council reviews have been undertaken. Rather, I think this is clearly about using heritage as a mechanism to stop development, and it's development that has absolutely nothing to do with our property. We understand, we're fully aware of the interim heritage orders and the developments that are proposed on other parts of our street. None of that has anything to do with number 123. GML's assessment has been undertaken on the basis of a very small number of dwellings, a total of 8, and their surroundings, and by their own conclusion, do not have enough heritage value to form a conservation area. Their assessment concludes, and I quote, "It is unlikely that the proposed heritage conservation area has the potential to meet any of the listed criteria." Not one, not one. And from listening to the other heritage experts, I think it's very clear that there's been in the past detailed heritage analysis of all of these dwellings. Now, not now, because we haven't engaged a heritage consultant to study our house for obvious reasons, but in the past, there's been a detailed analysis of what the heritage value or not of this property is. The development that has been permitted by North Sydney Council over the preceding 20 years in Holt Avenue has seemingly had little consideration for the integrity of the Holt Avenue streetscape. And as a result, any previous heritage value that potentially existed has now been irrevocably eroded. As recently as 5 years ago, the substantial Federation dwelling on number 134 Holt Avenue, which is directly opposite our house, was approved for demolition and the construction of 5 townhouses, and there was seemingly no consideration of heritage value in that case. In 2013, we undertook the substantial renovation of our home, and that has resulted in there being very little original building fabric remaining. Now, I understand that you will have read our submission, and so you will note that that renovation was very extensive. It replaced many of the original elements because they were simply worn out and incapable of being kept. Our house now, as a result, has less original fabric than in 1993 and 2007 when the detailed council studies were undertaken. And those studies found that there was no value in listing this property or any others in Holt Avenue as heritage items. Indeed, apart from 125 Holt Avenue, none of these properties have ever been assessed as having enough value to be listed as heritage items or even contributory or neutral items. We note the council's report is a little bit misleading in that regard, but I do take from Mr. Altram's presentation that that is very much the case. It has never been considered for listing. The renovation we undertook to our house was done under a compliant...
Can I just say, we have read your submission, so I just want you to really highlight the points.
Sure, okay, yep. So we undertook the renovation of our house under a complying development certificate. That would not be possible to do if our house was heritage listed, and I would refer back to my point, we would never have bought the house. The merit, I guess my main point is that given the imposition that this would place on us as landowners and ratepayers, we would like council to undertake a thorough LGA-wide assessment as they have done in the past, not just as what's tantamount to a spot rezoning kind of approach to heritage application, because there are impacts on us, and it's not right that we can rely on one report that seems to be at odds. And I note that GML's most recent report is at odds with not only its previous report, but also what I've heard today, all the other heritage experts that have more recently considered the heritage value. Surely this at least would indicate that the matter is worthy of further investigation before burdening us with the imposition of a heritage listing. So that's about all I have to say, other than to pick up on a point that was made earlier, I think by Mr. Altram, and the point being that the GML's most recent report doesn't seem to have considered the level of change to these dwellings. I would certainly concur with that because it does not appear that they have considered in any way the level of change that's been undertaken to our dwelling. And we see that there would be no value there in listing. We would be in the ridiculous position if we wanted to make future amendments to our house. It seems that we would be in the ridiculous position of needing to submit a DA that is supported by a heritage report that justifies modification to a 2013 construction. And that just seems ludicrous to us. So on that note, we would just respectfully request that the panel fully considers these issues rather than rubber stamping a recommendation by council that would then just set off a process that we would have, further involvement in. Should the panel consider that a heritage listing is potentially justifiable and legally supportable, then we believe that council should be required to undertake a more thorough investigation on the basis of an LGA-wide approach, as they have always done in the past, rather than a rushed knee-jerk reaction. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Motic. And now if I can invite Bernadette Can.
Hi, yeah, I'd like to thank the panel for time to share my views today. I'm Bernadette Can. I'm the property owner for 121 Holt Avenue in Cremorne. I'm just a humble property owner and I'm thinking, how do I get dragged into this situation? The push to have my property and the neighbouring properties to be heritage listed seems very rushed. Basically, we haven't given very much time. If the council wanted to review conservation areas across the North Sydney area, then it should be a broader consultation, just as Paula just mentioned, and not just single out individual properties around Holt Avenue. Now, I had a DA put in for my front sandstone fence back in 2012, and it actually took 4 months to be approved. Now, I'm just wondering, what will heritage listing mean to me? What sort of council approvals or heritage approvals I need to get every time I do a change to my home, even if it's a small change? Is it going to be much longer delays for approvals? Is it going to be a financial burden on me? I don't understand what all the implications are. My home was substantially renovated by the prior owner back 20 to 30 years ago. The rear of my property was demolished and it's pretty modernized. It's got additional bedrooms that don't look very heritage at all, and there's been a substantial alteration. So I don't see any heritage value with my property. I am aware that when GML were putting together their report, they were keen to visit some of the properties. Now, I can assure you, no one came to inspect my property internally. So how was that assessment made that my property should be heritage listed? If I wanted to buy a heritage home, I would have bought them, but I didn't buy into a conservation area. So I'm strongly opposed to council's proposal to heritage list my property. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And nobody endeavoured to knock on your door or at any stage?
Nope, nope.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much. Any other questions? No, don't believe so. Thank you very much. The next person that I have is Mr. Graham Brooks. Are you online, Mr. Brooks? I haven't seen you in the views. Is Graham Brooks there, Holly?
No.
Could you please phone him? We
No,
will phone.
Chairman, I am online. I was just unmuted.
Oh, okay. Mr. Brooks, are you there?
I am. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. I can't see you.
No, unfortunately, Madam Chair, I'm just having trouble with my video camera. So if you can.
No, that's all right. Okay. Mm-hmm.
So, okay. Thank you very much for the opportunity. I am today speaking only about 131 and 133 Holt Street, and in my carefully considered opinion, the recommendation before you to heritage list these properties is so completely flawed that it simply cannot be used as a basis for any such listing. Now, like my other colleagues, I have been commissioned to prepare an independent peer review and a rigorous peer review. So I'll try and be as gentle as I can, but we need to be factual in our analysis. We were having done one of the original statements of heritage impact that was submitted with the DA. We were re-engaged by Helm to review all of the SHRI reports, that were submitted by the applicant. And we also examined very carefully every one of the multiple criticisms contained in the GML documents about those reports. So we've been very thorough in the analysis that we looked through. We've engaged again with the historic research and the questions that were supposedly left unanswered. But primarily, Chair, we also examined the fabric of the building in great detail over 3 separate inspection periods. We also requested the preparation of a measured set of floor plans of the existing building so that we could, in fact, record and study in detail elements like thicknesses of walls, because they are very, very important when you're looking at the degree of change that's gone on. We then prepared a set of diagrams showing the evolution of this house at various stages, Mr. Oldham referred to the summary report that was submitted to the court. And I don't know whether you've got, I assume you might have our second report of May this year. And if you do, I would refer you to pages 24 and 27 of that report before you conclude your final decision, if I might suggest that. This work gave us an extremely thorough understanding of the nature of the place, which we have now used to review the DML recommendations and the heritage data sheet. In my considered opinion, the fundamental flaw in the DML report is in its own internal and unresolved confusion as to whether the property is a Victorian cottage with later alterations or a rare asymmetrical pair of Federation period semi-detached cottages, or both. Just a few little extracts from the DML report, if I might. The report notes the significant alterations and additions undertaken in 1911 have decreased the legibility of the dwelling as a late Victorian house. However, the Federation overlays do not detract from its historic character. I think you've heard evidence this morning which would disagree with that. Their report claims that the building form now presented dates almost entirely from the original Victorian architectural composition, somehow making it a rare example of an asymmetrical semi-detached pair of Victorian and Federation dwellings. And again, I think you've heard this morning the extent of the loss or overlay of the original cottage by the Federation extensions, and they're all documented in certainly our report and I think other reports as well. The research we did on the fabric shows that the alterations include a Victorian and Federation expansion of the front elevation in both directions across its width, totally revised roof composition because it had to take up the new extensions, tiles instead of the original slate roofing, internal alterations to the original room layouts, and the subdivision of the original Victorian cottage. Now, that cottage had been built across two historic land subdivision lots. However, they did not match what happened inside the house when they put a subdividing wall down the side of the central corridor. And in fact, they had to build another skin of what would have been brickwork but finished up as terracotta tiling to provide the relevant thickness between the two adjoining properties. Those properties were actually only created as they are in their current condition in the 1970s. So the house wasn't subdivided as it is now into two separate properties until the 1970s. So as I said, the dwellings present a confusing mix of some possibly surviving Victorian period features overlaid by an extensive retrofitted Victorian asymmetrical composition, which in fact finished up as a Federation period joinery in many cases, particularly the verandas. And when the original single house was massively changed to suit contemporary socio-demographic changes. And as has been noted again this morning, the original house was apparently redundant by the early 20th century, and there was a much greater demand for smaller semi-detached cottages emerging in the marketplace. So finally, I would say that the DML methodology fails to understand the required assessment of the properties against the Heritage Council thresholds for inclusion and exclusion, nor do they take much knowledge of words like special, strong, significant connections when they're looking at the individual criteria. Even though at the end of their conclusions, they simply say, oh, well, they actually meet the thresholds, but they haven't discussed how or why. So really, in conclusion, committee, I would like to say that the very description which the panel is being asked to heritage list is so thoroughly flawed as to be completely baseless and utterly confusing to the general public. And if I can use the term that's at the bottom of the recommendation, the buildings apparently, in their opinion, are a pair of Victorian semi-detached dwellings which serve as a rare surviving example of their type. I think all the consolidated evidence from all the experts proves absolutely the opposite. So to use this definition is completely irrelevant to your recommendation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Brooks. No questions? No, thank you. Ms. Samantha Polkinghorn, sorry.
Thank you. Samantha Polkinghorn, I'm a director of NBRS, and I've been practicing in heritage for over 30 years. Thank you for this opportunity to present and basically everything I was going to present has basically already been presented by by Mr. Altram, Mr. Brooks, Mr. Davies. So I won't go over it again, but I would like to reiterate that everything that has been presented in terms of these more detailed assessments of 131 and 133 Holt Avenue, I completely support. We undertook our own research. We undertook detailed physical analysis of the retained fabric. So, you know, in our report, we fully understand what the changes to the building are. And again, I won't go on in detail because I think it's already been perfectly presented. But the one observation I'd like to make regarding the GML report is that a lot of the description of the architectural features of the building are incorrect or inconsistent. And, you know, it appears, as has already been mentioned, that the interior and rear of the site weren't visited by GML, which I think is which essentially flaws their assessment of 131 and 133 Holt Avenue. Again, I have more information here that's already been presented, so I shan't repeat it.
Can I just ask you a question on that last point you've made? So yes. You're saying that for the GML report that the interiors were not inspected?
My review of the GML report is that they weren't inspected. It appears that it was inspected from the public domain. And again, some of the description of what could be seen from the public domain, just in terms of some of the architectural terminology, I believe is incorrect.
Okay, thank you. Mm-hmm.
So again, in summary, I believe that the listing of these sites is unjustified and should not be supported. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now I'll move to Mr. James Phillips. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. James Phillips, Weir Phillips Heritage, again, 30 years experience in heritage. We were commissioned to write a report on 115 to 119 Holt Avenue as a heritage impact statement. I'll be brief. I concur with all of my colleagues, Mr. Altram, Mr. Davies, Ms. Polkinghorne, and Mr. Brooks, and anyone else who may have omitted, in that this is a flawed report. I would suggest to the panel that planning in New South Wales is based on the orderly development of land, and the process that we're in at the moment speaks so far against the orderly development of land. North Sydney Council have conducted many reviews over many years. This is one of the most picked over local government areas in terms of heritage significant properties and the protection of heritage of all the local government areas in New South Wales. And I commend North Sydney for that process and for their thoroughness. But that thoroughness isn't served by the ad hoc listing of properties on a basis where in the normal process of revising Schedule 5 of an LEP is to conduct a thorough survey. And usually these days, because so many properties are listed, it's a thematic survey looking at things that might have been missed in the past. This is not a case of that. These are Federation period cottages of little merit. The assessment lowers the bar for heritage listing, which overall demeans the whole heritage process in New South Wales by meaning that almost any property it could be listed as a heritage item. And that's not the intent of the Heritage Act. It's not to see every property listed. It's to see properties of merit and of unusual and of distinction be listed. So my comments go to the fact that I think this whole process stands against the orderly development of property. These houses had a zoning, and again, North Sydney Council, who has a very thorough planning department, gave this zoning to this land with a great degree of intent, and then it's subverted by another process which demeans the value of heritage listing in New South Wales and doesn't go to the orderly development of land. Thank you very much.
Just one moment, Mr. Phillips. Did you say you were representing a particular property?
115 to 119 Holt Avenue.
Okay, and your comments are in respect of the whole of the report?
Well, my comments are in respect to the whole of the process, and the way the process has come about. You know, you've got a meeting.
No, I understand what you're saying, but I just wanted to understand whether you were particularly focusing on those properties, or and I can hear what you say. You've mentioned the process, but I was interested to know who you were representing.
Yeah, the impact is spread over the whole listing.
Yeah. Okay.
So,
right.
Sorry, Madam Chair. Can I just clarify with Mr. Phillips?
Yeah.
Mr. Phillips, I thought you'd also done a report in relation to 131 to 133.
We conducted a peer review on that as well. Yes.
Oh, okay.
Yep.
Right. So you have in a way looked at, I
suppose,
the
whole thing. Yes. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Very well. Thank you, Mr. Phillips. No questions, Jared? No. Thank you. And I have Kareem Dennis.
No, that's Pamela Jeffrey.
Sorry?
Changed to Pamela Jeffrey.
Yeah.
Oh, Pamela Jeffries. Okay, I didn't know that. Thank you.
Yeah, so I work for City Plan Heritage. Karen May is the director, but unfortunately she's double booked today.
Okay.
So, but I actually inspected the properties. We were commissioned to have a look at 131 and 133 Holt Avenue, and that was independent of any other consultants. We looked at the buildings initially. We had, there was COVID lockdowns and we had some difficulty getting access to reports and access to the properties. So we subsequently went and had a look at them internally this year. We concluded that the buildings didn't meet the threshold for listing. I think GML identified historic, aesthetic and rarity criteria for these two properties. But our documentary and physical assessment of the property determined, well, we concluded that they didn't meet the threshold for listing, either as an individual Victorian house or as a semi-detached pair of houses. The original house from the 1890s was used as two separate properties from about 1911 on, and that's confirmed in rate books held by North Sydney Council. The property, although originally in the 1890s it was two allotments, it was used as a single property. And the land wasn't actually, the house wasn't actually, or doesn't appear to have been formally subdivided into two houses until 1979, when the land titles indicate that there were two separate owners at that stage. The interiors of the building, well, the exterior has obviously been changed. It had additions to the north and south sides of the building. The interiors had been changed. There'd been new walls inserted. So I think the original description of the building in the 1890s said it had 6 rooms, but 2 of those rooms internally were subdivided in 1911 with terracotta tiles. And when you walk into the spaces now, the cornices and the decorative elements like ceiling roses have been altered to match sort of 1911 configuration, but in fact the ceiling roses have been installed after 1979. They're modern items. The back of the house has been changed. Obviously it's been altered to have bathrooms and kitchens for 2 separate houses. The roof has been changed from, I think everyone else has previously mentioned it, from slate to terracotta tiles. The more we went through the house, we thought that it had been compromised, so that it doesn't clearly reflect the Victorian character of the building or Edwardian semi-detached buildings. And although the streetscape presentation is really the setback and a little garden in front, the area around it has been, the amenity of these cottages has been changed by the residential development that's been allowed to go up to the south and I think to the sort of east of it. The area is actually included, I think, in the Murdoch neighbourhood, and the desired future character for that area is primarily high density residential accommodations. So, you know, for the last 40 years, the whole character of the area has been changing, and we've been left with these two buildings that are actually isolated from the residential development by the new sort of 1970s residential development. They're now seen closer to the development that's going on Military Road, and the houses immediately to the sort of north of these, which I guess are 135 and 137, also appear to have been old buildings that are highly compromised by changes and the removal of fabric. We looked at the report by GML. We think it's confusing, the terminology that they use. They keep referring to 131 and 133 as modest Lake Victorian semi-detached dwellings, which they're actually not. When you review the buildings, it was either a Victorian house as a single occupancy, which has been truly compromised, or it's overlaid with Edwardian changes and subsequent changes. Now, when you walk through them, I think number 133 has been entirely upgraded to suit the current owners or previous owners' requirements. And it's, you know, what is commensurate with what you'd expect someone living in a modern house to have, but it doesn't really reflect, apart from, I think, 2 fireplaces and possibly, I think, a cornice in one room. It doesn't reflect the character of either Edwardian or Victorian buildings in the area. So I think we support everything that all the previous consultants have said. I think everyone has independently come up with, assessed it against the criteria set by the New South Wales Heritage Council and have come up with the same conclusion. I'd just like to thank everyone for giving us the opportunity to sort of go through that. I'm sure you've read all the reports.
Yes, we have.
Yeah, ad nauseum.
Yes, thank you, Ms. Jeffrey. And I just wanted to make sure everyone felt as if they'd had the opportunity to address the panel. I've allowed everyone more than the normal 3 minutes, and which is what we often do at the North Sydney panel here. But I would also just like to note we have an observer, Marzi Mark. Are you there? You do not wish to say anything? No, he hasn't come. And I just wanted to, for the public meeting record, wanted to advise that we have received 8 submissions from Chris Cunningham-Reid, Anne Little, Michael Wang, Paula Mottek and Christopher Ryan, Catherine Clark, Harrison Precinct, Leslie Somerville and Mark Marzi. So I just wanted to also acknowledge those 8 submissions that we've all had the opportunity to read. So I think that brings the public meeting to a close. The panel will now make its deliberations. And as I said, we just make a recommendation to the council, and then it is a matter for the council as to whether it votes to proceed to Gateway or not. But I do thank you all for your time and for your assistance in our consideration in making our recommendation. So thank you all very much. And I would like to formally close this public meeting at 12:25. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.